We don't put engineers on investor stages. Those were the exact words Evan Holloway said to me at 8:12 on a Thursday morning. He adjusted the cuff of his navy suit while saying it, like he was discussing coffee orders instead of erasing 19 years of work. The conference room sat on the 32nd floor. Glass walls, city skyline, 8 investors flying in from New York and Singapore, 2 private equity firms, a funding round that people inside the company whispered could cross $600 million. And I was being told to leave. My name is Andrew Parker. I was 48 years old then, and I had spent almost 2 decades building systems most people in that company couldn't explain, even while they claimed to manage them. I worked for Holloway Dynamics, an industrial logistics company that moved products across ports, warehouses, and manufacturing sites. Not glamorous work, but when supply chains fail, entire industries stop. I built solutions for those failures. Quietly. The prototype everyone was excited about that year was mine. Not just code, not just software. Years of field visits, breakdown reports, shipping delays, failed forecasts, late-night models, and things learned standing beside exhausted plant managers at 2 in the morning. The system predicted bottlenecks before they happened. Waste dropped. Delivery timing improved. Clients saved millions. Executives started calling it revolutionary after ignoring it for years. Now investors wanted in. And suddenly Evan was the face of it. Evan Holloway, the CEO's son. 32. MBA. Perfect hair. Perfect presentations. The kind of man who used words like transformation and vision while other people stayed up fixing reality. I stared at him after he told me I wouldn't be joining the presentation. I thought maybe I misunderstood. I built the technical architecture, I said carefully. Investors will have questions. He gave me a polite smile. The dangerous kind. Andrew, investors buy leadership, he said, not engineers. A few people looked down at their laptops. Nobody defended me. Not legal, not operations, not even Martin Holloway, our CEO, his father. Martin avoided my eyes completely. That part stayed with me longer than the insult, because silence from people you protected hurts differently. Evan reached for the presentation clicker. We'll reference your contributions if needed. Reference. 19 years reduced to a support role. I walked out before anger showed on my face. That mattered to me back then. Control mattered. I spent the next hour in my office watching the live investor stream on an internal feed. And then something happened I still remember clearly. Slide 14 appeared. The architecture diagram. My architecture. My labels. My framework. Even the naming convention I used for prediction layers. Except my name was gone. Under project leadership. Evan Holloway, strategic development lead. I stared at the screen. My chest felt strangely empty. Not rage. Something worse. Recognition. Because betrayal hurts less when part of you expected it. Then I noticed another thing. A phrase Evan used. Our proprietary invention. I leaned back slowly. Months earlier, legal had pushed paperwork transferring inventorship, rights connected to commercialization. I never signed. Not because I was planning revenge. Because compensation agreements kept getting delayed. My legal name still sat on several patent filings. Andrew Parker, primary inventor. I remember looking at that investor stream and thinking one quiet thought. They removed my name from the slides, not from the documents. People assume the moment everything changes is loud. It usually isn't. Most of the time your life shifts through small things you ignore because loyalty feels more important than pride. I joined Holloway Dynamics at 29. Back then the company occupied 2 aging buildings near a freight corridor outside Chicago. We were smaller, hungrier. I started as a systems engineer fixing routing failures nobody wanted. Trucks sat idle. Warehouses overstocked products they didn't need. Clients threatened contracts. I liked difficult problems. Machines and processes made sense to me. People were harder. Over time, I became the person executives called when something expensive broke. A shipping network crashed before holiday demand. I fixed it. A major client prepared to leave after repeated delays. I rebuilt forecasting systems and kept them. Software migration failed across 3 regions. I slept in the office for nearly 2 days. Nobody remembers those moments once stability returns. That's how competence disappears. It becomes expected, then invisible. Years passed. Titles changed around me. Vice presidents arrived and left. Consultants earned enormous fees explaining problems teams like mine already understood. I stayed, partly because I believed in the work, partly because being needed becomes addictive. My marriage didn't survive that habit. My ex-wife never hated me. That made it worse. One night years earlier, she looked at me across our kitchen table and asked, "If the company disappeared tomorrow, who would you be?" I didn't answer, maybe because I didn't know. By then, usefulness had become identity. We divorced quietly. No screaming, no dramatic ending, just distance. Our daughter, Emma, stayed close to both of us. When this story happened, she was finishing university. Engineering, strangely enough. Tuition bills still arrived every semester. I paid them without fail. That mattered to me. The prototype investors celebrated wasn't created during one breakthrough year. People love stories about sudden genius. Reality is slower. Messier. The system came from nearly a decade of accumulated knowledge. Patterns gathered from ports. Manufacturing delays. Weather disruptions. Fuel cost shifts. Labor shortages. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe to join our community. I share real workplace stories every day for anyone who believes quiet competence should always be respected. I built models connecting all of it. Eventually, the predictions became frighteningly accurate. Clients trusted results because results kept saving money. That trust took years. Then Evan arrived. I remember the announcement email. MBA from Stanford. Innovation, strategy, background. Executive acceleration track. Martin Holloway introduced his son like a future certainty. At first, I tried to like him. Honestly, Evan was smart in a certain way. Fast speaker, good at reading rooms. He knew what investors wanted before they asked. But he also had something I learned to fear. Confidence without consequences. Within months, projects changed names. Teams reorganized. Existing work got packaged as new initiatives. Presentation decks grew prettier. The substance underneath stayed mostly built by people already there. People like me. Then small things started disappearing. Meeting invitations, authorship lines, technical summaries. One report I wrote came back with Evan listed as lead contributor. I assumed it was administrative error. I corrected it politely. The revised version still credited him first. You tell yourself not to care. You say work speaks for itself. That results matter. You keep your head down. That's what I did. Again and again. Because older employees sometimes survive by becoming practical. Not proud. Months before the investor presentation, legal began preparing intellectual property filings tied to commercialization. Patents, licensing structures, ownership pathways. There were forms needing inventor signatures. My signatures, compensation terms connected to future use remained unfinished. I asked questions. Answers kept getting delayed. So I waited. The filings moved forward with inventorship preserved. Mine included. I also kept copies, emails, version histories, design records. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. Engineers document things. Good ones always do. At the time, I thought those archives were just professional discipline. I didn't know they would eventually become the only reason powerful people stopped ignoring me. I didn't sleep much the night before the investor presentation. Not because I was nervous, because I already knew something was off. At 9 a.m., I logged into the internal stream again from my office. I wasn't invited to the room upstairs anymore. Evan stood at the front of the glass conference hall like he belonged there. He wore a dark suit and a calm smile that looked rehearsed. Behind him, the slides moved smoothly. Clean design, bold numbers, big promises. 600 million in projected value expansion, he said. I'm proud to present the system our team has built. Our team, not me. Not even a pause before taking ownership of years of work. Investors watched closely. They looked impressed at first. That part was expected. The prototype was strong. It really was. It worked in ways most people in that room didn't fully understand yet. That was always the danger with complex systems. They look simple when they are finished. But Evan wasn't explaining depth. He was selling confidence. Martin Holloway, the CEO, sat at the center table like a man watching his legacy being rewritten in real time. He smiled when Evan spoke. That smile should have made me feel something. But I was already numb. Then the question started. A man from the New York investment group leaned forward. Can you explain the prediction engine's decision structure? Evan paused for half a second too long. Then he gave a broad answer. We use adaptive AI modeling with real-time feedback loops. It sounded good. It meant nothing. Another investor spoke next. Who designed the underlying failure detection system? Evan's fingers tapped the table once. Then he said, our internal innovation team. No names. No clarity. Just fog. I leaned closer to my screen without realizing it, because I knew exactly where this was going. Technical systems don't collapse under praise. They collapse under questions. And investors always ask the right ones. A third voice joined in. This one's sharper. What about patent coverage? Who holds the intellectual property rights for this system? That question changed the room. I saw Evan's expression tighten slightly. Not panic. Not yet. But discomfort. He adjusted his posture. We have full corporate ownership of all developed assets, he said. That wasn't entirely true. And everyone in that room who understood IP law would have known it. A few seconds of silence followed. Then more questions came. Faster now. More precise. Investors weren't attacking. They were testing. Like engineers probing weak points in a structure. I felt something shift in my chest. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just pressure building. Because I knew what they would find if they kept digging. Hours later, the presentation ended. Applause followed. But it felt thinner than before. Less certain. Back in my office, messages started coming through internal channels. First from legal, then compliance, then operations, requests for documentation, clarifications, archive design proof. Someone used the word discrepancy. That word always means trouble in corporate environments. Evan's team tried to stabilize the narrative. New messages went out saying everything was aligned and verified. But I noticed something important. No one asked me directly yet. They were circling the truth without touching it. At 3:17 p.m., my calendar pinged. A meeting invite appeared. Subject line, urgent, legal review, intellectual property verification. No sender message. No explanation. Just urgency. I stared at it for a long moment. Because I understood something in that silence. This was no longer about a presentation. It was about ownership. The legal meeting started at 10 a.m. the next morning. A glass room again. Different floor. Same company. Different atmosphere. Tighter. Two lawyers from corporate legal sat across from me. A compliance officer beside them. And a silent HR representative taking notes like everything already had an outcome. One of the lawyers opened a folder. Andrew, he said carefully, we need a quick clarification regarding the prototype IP structure. I already knew that phrase. Quick clarification usually means slow consequences. He slid a document across the table. Patent filings. My name was on several of them. Lead inventor. Co-inventor on others. Then he looked up. Investors have raised questions about consistency between presentation ownership claims and registered filings. I didn't speak immediately, because I was waiting for the real question. It came next. Have any of these rights been formally reassigned? No, I said. Simple. Direct. The compliance officer glanced down her notes. One of the lawyers leaned forward slightly. Was there any agreement in progress for transfer? Yes, I said again. But it was never completed. That part was important. Months earlier, legal had started preparing commercialization agreements. They wanted inventor rights aligned with future licensing. I had asked for compensation details before signing anything. Those details never arrived. Meetings were postponed. Emails delayed. Then nothing. So I stopped chasing it. I didn't think it would matter yet. Now it did. The room grew quieter. Not dramatic silence. Professional silence. The kind where people calculate risk instead of emotion. The HR representative finally spoke. Andrew, just to confirm, you retained full inventor attribution as listed in these filings? Yes. Another pause. Then the lawyer shifted papers again. There are also internal engineering documents and email chains attributing core architecture decisions to you. I wrote them, I said. No emotion. Just fact. That seemed to make it worse. Because facts are harder to bend. The compliance officer exhaled slowly. Evan's presentation last week described the system as developed under his leadership. I nodded once. I didn't need to say anything else. They already understood the gap. The lawyer closed the folder slightly. From a legal standpoint, this creates a verification issue before investor capital can be released. That was the first time I felt the scale of it. Not anger, not revenge, just visibility. For years, I had been useful but unseen. Now I was suddenly unavoidable. The CEO arrived halfway through the meeting. Martin Holloway. He didn't sit immediately. He stood near the glass wall for a moment like he was deciding how to enter his own problem. When he finally sat down, he didn't look at me. He looked at the lawyers. "We need this resolved quickly," he said. No greeting, no acknowledgement of history, just urgency. Evan appeared 10 minutes later. His usual confidence was reduced. Not gone, but thinner. He smiled at me once. It didn't reach his eyes. For the first time since I met him, he looked unsure of what role he was playing in the room. The lawyer slid another document toward me. A request. Retroactive confirmation of ownership alignment. In plain terms, they wanted me to sign away clarity. Fix the story. Smooth the edges. Keep the funding safe. All I had to do was sign. I looked at the paper for a long moment. Then I pushed it back across the table. "I can't sign something that isn't accurate," I said. No anger. No performance. Just refusal. The room shifted again. Not loudly, but permanently. Because in that moment, I stopped being someone they could quietly adjust and became someone they had to deal with directly. The first thing people misunderstand about due diligence is this. It doesn't create new truth. It only reveals what was already there. By the third day after I refused to sign the paperwork, everything at Holloway Dynamics started moving differently. Slower in some places, faster in others, and far less controlled. External auditors arrived first, then investor-side analysts, then legal teams that didn't belong to the company. They asked for everything, not summaries, not presentations, raw records, emails, version histories, commit logs, patent drafts, meeting notes, the kind of data most executives assume nobody will ever actually read. But engineers never think like that. We assume someone will, so we save everything. I watched from my office as years of quiet work suddenly became visible. One analyst sent me a message directly. "Can you confirm authorship of the routing optimization engine V3? I replied with a single line. "Yes. Built between March and June. Logged in repository. No emotion. Just timestamps." Another message came an hour later. "Your name appears consistently across architecture commits predating executive project assignment. Can you explain?" There was nothing to explain. That was the point. The system existed before the story they were told. By afternoon, the internal narrative started breaking. Not publicly yet, but inside the company, people were reading things they had never bothered to check before. Old emails resurfaced. In one thread from 2 years earlier, I had written, "Do not finalize commercialization claims until inventorship structure is confirmed." It was ignored, not because it was wrong, because it was inconvenient. Then came the patent review. My name was there again, and again. Primary inventor on core prediction systems, co-inventor on failure detection logic, and sole architect on early design frameworks that everything else depended on. Evan's name appeared nowhere in those early filings. Only later documentation, added after he joined. The investors noticed that immediately. I wasn't in those meetings, but I could feel the shift through the messages I received. Less skepticism toward me, more toward leadership. By the fourth day, internal politics started to surface. Executives who had ignored me for years suddenly became very polite. Some tried to reframe history. They called it documentation inconsistency. Others suggested administrative overlap. One VP emailed me directly. "Appreciate your foundational contributions. Let's align messaging moving forward." Messaging, not truth. That word always reveals intention. Evan stopped appearing in meetings. Not officially removed, just absent. Then I saw him in the hallway outside my office late one evening. He didn't knock. He just stood there for a second before speaking. I didn't know it would escalate like this, he said. His voice was lower than before, less controlled, more human. I was following what leadership wanted for the pitch. I looked at him for a long moment, because that was the first honest thing he had said, and also the most revealing. He wasn't the origin of the problem. He was a product of it. Leadership didn't create those patents, I said quietly. He didn't respond. He just nodded once and walked away. By the end of the week, investor confidence started to shift. Not collapse. Not yet. But hesitation appeared. Questions about valuation models. Concerns about intellectual property clarity. Requests for independent verification. That last phrase changed everything. Independent verification always means loss of control, because it means someone outside the system now owns the narrative. And they don't care about internal politics. They care about risk. On Friday morning, I walked into the office and noticed something subtle. People weren't looking at Evan anymore. They were looking at documents, screens, emails, proof. The company had spent years building a story. Now it was being tested against records. And records don't lie gently. By the end of the day, I overheard two senior managers in the hallway. If investors pause the funding round, the valuation drops instantly. We can't afford a delay. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about credit anymore. It was about survival. And the system I built, quietly, carefully, over years, was now the only thing standing between the company and financial instability. The panic didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like a change in temperature, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. On Monday morning, the entire executive floor felt different. Assistants moved faster. Meetings were rescheduled without explanation. Phones rang longer before being answered, and doors that used to stay open were suddenly closed. By 9:15 a.m., I received an invite to a board-level discussion. I had not been in one of those rooms in years, not since I stopped being politically useful. When I entered, the seating arrangement told me everything. Board members, legal counsel, two investor representatives, the CEO, and Evan sitting slightly back like someone unsure whether he still belonged in the frame. Martin Holloway spoke first. We need clarity on the situation before we proceed further with funding discussions. His voice was controlled, but thinner than before. He wasn't leading the room anymore. He was reacting to it. One of the investors leaned forward. We've paused final approval pending resolution of intellectual property attribution concerns. Paused, not canceled. That word still left space for damage control, but not much. The legal counsel turned toward me. Andrew, can you walk us through the development timeline again? So I did. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just clearly. When it started, what was built first? Which systems depended on which modules? What existed before Evan joined the project? Every answer matched the records already under review. No contradiction, no ambiguity. The room became quieter as I spoke. Not because I was persuasive, because documentation had already spoken before me. Evan finally spoke up. His voice was careful now. I want to clarify that my role was strategic oversight during commercialization. No one responded immediately, because the gap was obvious. Oversight is not invention. The investor on the left side of the table looked down at his notes. Then up at the CEO. This doesn't align with how the system was presented during the pitch. Martin didn't answer right away. That pause was long enough to feel heavy. When he finally spoke, it wasn't confident. It may have been simplified for presentation purposes. That was the wrong answer. Everyone in the room knew it. Because investors don't punish mistakes. They punish uncertainty. After the meeting, things accelerated again, but not in the company's control. Outside forces took over the timeline. Independent audit teams were confirmed. Legal review expanded. Investor lawyers requested direct access to me for technical validation. And for the first time, I was not being filtered through management. That alone changed everything. Later that afternoon, Evan asked to meet me privately. We stood in a small conference room with the blinds half closed. He didn't sit down at first. I didn't try to take your work, he said. I stayed quiet. He continued. I was told the system needed a leadership face. Investors don't fund engineers. That's what I was told. There was again. Told. Not decided. Not owned. just passed along like responsibility without consequence. You benefited from it, I said calmly. He nodded. I know. That was the first time he didn't defend himself. But it didn't change anything, because intent doesn't erase impact. When he left the room, I sat there for a while alone, not thinking about revenge, not even about fairness, just about how long systems can survive on misdirection before reality catches up. And now, for the first time since I joined this company, reality had a seat at the table. The meeting wasn't scheduled like a normal meeting. It was summoned. No soft calendar invite. No polite wording. Just a firm notice. Board plus investor resolution session. Final IP review. When I walked into the room, it already felt different from every other space I'd been in at Holloway Dynamics. This wasn't a conference room. It was a decision room. Everyone important was there. Board members lined one side. Investor representatives on the other. Legal counsel in between like a buffer that no longer worked. And at the center, Martin Holloway sat with the kind of stillness that comes right before control is lost completely. Evan was there too, but he didn't look like the version of himself from a week ago. No confidence, no smooth posture, just a man realizing that titles don't protect you when documents start speaking louder than people. The lead investor opened first. We are not here to debate intention, he said. We are here to confirm ownership, contribution, and risk exposure. That word again, risk. All corporate power eventually reduces itself to that. They turned to me. Mr. Parker, we need a clear explanation of the system architecture and your role in its original development. I nodded once. Then I started. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth the same way I always understood it. System layers. Data inputs from field operations. The prediction engine I designed after years of failure reports. The early prototypes built before any executive rebranding. The dependency chain that tied everything together. As I spoke, I watched people shift in their seats. Not because the story was emotional, because it was precise, and precision removes doubt. One investor interrupted only once. Are you saying the core system existed before executive project assignment? Yes, I said. That was enough. The room went quiet again. Then legal counsel spoke carefully. Based on documentation and verified commits, that appears to be correct. No one argued. Because they couldn't. Martin finally spoke. His voice was lower than before. If there were misalignments in how contributions were represented, that was not intended to mislead investors. That sentence tried to soften impact. It didn't work. Because intent doesn't change exposure. The lead investor leaned back. This affects valuation stability and governance confidence. That was the real sentence of the day. Not blame. Not anger. Confidence. Evan finally spoke again. But this time, there was nothing polished in his voice. I never built the system, he said quietly. The honesty landed harder than denial would have. Because it confirmed everything without resistance. No one responded to him directly. The room had already moved past him. The board began discussing restructuring, governance changes, leadership boundaries, IP acknowledgement corrections. And as they spoke, something shifted in real time. Martin Holloway was no longer steering the company. He was reacting to decisions being made around him. Evan was no longer the center of the narrative. He had become a footnote inside it. Then came the part one didn't expect. An investor turned toward me. If we restructure ownership recognition and stabilize IP attribution, would you be willing to remain involved in system oversight? The room went still again. Because that question wasn't about engineering. It was about control. About whether the person who built the system would stay inside the system. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was unsure. Because I understood the weight of saying yes. Or no. Finally, I said, I will not continue under conditions where authorship is misrepresented. Simple. No threat. Just boundary. The legal counsel nodded slowly, like that answer had already been predicted. The board moved on quickly after that. Decisions started forming without me. Evan was officially removed from direct oversight of the prototype program. Leadership accountability statements were drafted. Patent filings were flagged for correction notices. The funding wasn't killed, but it was reshaped completely. No one celebrated. No one smiled. because nothing about this felt like victory. It felt like exposure. When the meeting finally ended, people stood slowly, carefully, like they were leaving a room where something fragile had just been permanently altered. As I walked out, Martin Holloway stopped beside me. For the first time in this entire story, he looked tired in a human way. Not powerful, not angry, just aware. "You've been here a long time, Andrew," he said quietly. I nodded. Yes. He didn't apologize, and I didn't expect him to, because some systems don't end with apologies. They end with structure changes. I left the room knowing something had already shifted beyond repair. Not my career, not my work, but the illusion that credit and contribution always travel together. And once that illusion breaks, everything built on top of it starts to move. 3 weeks later, they made me an offer. A better title, equity, expanded authority, a formal recognition package tied to strategic continuity. It looked like repair on paper, but it still carried the same structure underneath. Control without honesty. Influence without respect. I read it once. Then I closed the folder, and I knew I was done. I didn't argue. I didn't negotiate. I simply declined. When I told them, there wasn't a dramatic reaction. No anger. No surprise. Only acceptance. Because by then, even they understood something had changed permanently. I left Holloway Dynamics a month later. Quietly. No announcement. No farewell meeting. Just a signed exit and a clear desk. My daughter, Emma, graduated that same year. Engineering, like me. I made it to her ceremony. Sat in the back. Watched her walk across the stage. That mattered more than anything that happened in boardrooms. After I left, I was contacted by a competitor firm that had been watching the situation unfold carefully. They didn't ask for a story. They asked for accuracy. That was enough. I joined them on my own terms. Months later, I saw the news. Holloway Dynamics restructuring. Leadership changes. Investor reshuffle. Delayed expansion plans. Nothing dramatic in headlines. Just quiet decline. The kind that follows systems built on unstable truth. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not really. Just clarity. Because I finally understood something simple. Credit doesn't disappear. It just waits. And when enough pressure builds, it comes back in the only form that matters in business. Evidence. I still think about that day in the glass room sometimes. Not with anger anymore. Just understanding. They didn't steal my work. They delayed recognizing it. And in the end, that delay cost them more than they ever realized.